this morning we already heard very interesting topics. First of all, if you remember, Michael talked about what specific security tools, technology you should use in order to improve the overall security of your environment. In the second talk, we heard about bring your own device, the security issues which come around this, and also what kind of technologies you can use in order to control the security issues connected with bring your own device and all these new fancy tools and devices that we are using currently to communicate with each other. And finally, we heard about all these cyber attacks, the recent security and cyber problems that we have, and the impacts that it has on governments as well as organizations. So what I'll do is I'll try to conclude a little bit, and let's see whether we can bring all these various items together. Specifically focusing on the question, so what do you have to do in order to protect your government data centers, let's say that the core data processing environment and technology you're using, in face of all these changes which are out there. We heard a lot about the cyber security and the cyber attacks out there. Just to give you also our view on this, as we saw, attackers really changed their habits in terms of maturity of their attacks, the severity or the impact of what they're able to gain, and if you like, so also the impact that they do have on organizations. So definitely there is an increase of external threats out there. We have the more mature attacks, the cyber attacks do now really, the attackers do exactly know what they would like to achieve. They go really for your crown jewels, if you like, so they put every effort, every money, every time they can spend in order to get this, and they use all of the information they're able to gather in order to be successful. So this is a new level of attack, and simple antivirus firewall solutions are no longer able to cope with it. There needs to be an, if you like, so more mature level of environment of protection in order to mitigate these kinds of attacks. On the other hand side, organizations always cope with the same problems. You see that there's a need for organizational change. You have to increase the capabilities of your security function, but on the other hand side, organizational change always takes time. So the necessary agility of organizations in order to adapt to these new challenges does not really keep pace with the increase of external threats. Budgeting always is a problem. So in order to increase your security function, it's not only to buy tools and technology, it's also to increase your staff, to ask for additional external service, to increase overall capabilities in terms of doing training, all these kind of things. All this costs money at the very end. And what you find at the very end also is that as everything gets more complicated, it's getting more and more difficult to keep all your skills within one organization. So for sure you have to train your people, you increase your staff, but there's an increasing demand on also getting external experience, external skills in order to move or put your security to the appropriate level. So in addition to the external threats or increase of external threats, you have also internal challenges which make it even harder to cope with the new cyber attacks. So what, if you like, so is the natural response on this? And there is a term which is out there in the industry since a number of years, which is the so-called SOC, the Security Operations Center. This is not only a new term, it's a new idea, a new approach to improve the overall security management or the management of security incidents within your organization, specifically within your data center. What does a SOC do, or what is the different kind of quality that a SOC provides? The idea is that you combine areas within your security function which are traditionally split to a combined force. Traditionally, you divide between your people that are doing policies, that are doing information security risk management, that are doing more kind of strategic work. On the other hand side, you have the operational guys who are managing, monitoring your tools, your firewalls, all your antivirus and whatsoever, and who are identifying and reacting on incidents and things like that. The idea of a SOC is nothing else than combining these two forces in order to, if you like, to have the right counterpart to a potential cyber attacker. Since anybody who is performing a kind of targeted attack against your organization is also using strategy as well as tactics. And so the way in order to counter this is to do the very same on your side. So you have to combine business knowledge, knowledge about your assets, knowledge about what are the threats and vulnerabilities out there. You have to combine these skills and experience with technical knowledge and skills regarding on how to monitor systems properly, how to configure the systems, how to identify incidents, how to do the proper analysis, and how to change system settings in a way that you're successfully able to counter attacks. This all serves at the very end to also consider a kind of mind change, which need to be considered in terms of cyber attacks. Since the traditional view on information security was that you just keep attacks outside. So you have your borders, you ensure that, or you take care that any kind of intruders whatsoever stop at the very borders of your systems. With the new quality of cyber attacks, what we understand now is that this is no longer possible. On the other hand side, the borders are also vanishing since more and more of your critical data is also on smartphones, is in the cloud, is in more dynamic kind of IT environment, which cannot as simply managed as it was the case for a traditional client-server environment. So nowadays what we do have to consider is that we are under attack and attackers might be successful. This can no longer be avoided at the long term. So what is the new challenge? It is that even if an attacker already gained, let's say, some access to our systems, we still would be able to control, let's say, our critical environment, to identify the attacker, to contain the attacker in areas where he does less harm, and to kick him out as soon as possible, and to do the aftermath if you like so. So this is the new, if you like so, change of mind. Just to summarize our understanding of a security operations center. Perhaps in the middle of this chart, you see the classical, let's say, the three classical items you need always consider when setting up a kind of IT organization, which is people, process, technology. This is for sure the core, and this is also, if you like so, the core elements of a security operations center. But in order to be successful, this security operations center needs to be integrated properly in your organization. And to start at the very beginning, this means that you have the proper executive support. At the very end, the security operations center can only be successful if it really reaches out to each and every corner of your organization. In case you have any blind spots, attackers will always be successful. And in order to also ensure that all these blind spots are covered, that each and every part of the organization is part or is monitored and controlled by the Security Operations Center, executive support is necessary. On the other hand side, if there is no periodic reporting from the Security Operations Center to the executive management won't be able to base its decisions on the latest state of what is going on in your system. They don't have the proper understanding of the security risks that you're currently facing and you're currently mitigating. So a closer reporting line to the executive management is a key aspect for successful security operations. The proper investment needs to be done, and it's not only the implementation cost, the CapEx, it's also the OpEx. So for sure there are also increasing costs in operating a security operations center successfully in the long term. The SOC also needs to fit very well in your overall IT strategy and your company strategy. For example, if you look at whatever sourcing strategy you have, so how much you would like to have in-house, what is the tasks and activities you put to an outsourcing company. And this also needs to fit in your overall SOC environment. So whatever skills you decided to have outsourced, it doesn't make sense to try and get this back again then in order in your SOC. So in this case also you have to consider between to what extent would it be necessary to include, let's say, external service providers into your security operations. So your service strategy needs to be part of your overall security strategy, if you like so. To move on, and I already talked about people, process, technology, which is really a crucial part. But the introduction or the integration into your environment is also a very critical part of this. A SOC can only be successful if it's not only technically integrated, but also integrated into your overall business, into your overall risk management, into your overall governance structure. Within the SOC, you need to understand what are the key information assets you're going to manage, what are the major services you need to focus on, and what the risks are in this area, what kind of business you're performing together with these information assets, and what threats and risks are out there in order which could be vulnerable to your information assets. So the integration to the environment, a very critical point. Analytics and reporting is the key aspect of a SOC. So what you're basically doing is you're gathering information from all of your systems, you combine it with vulnerability information you get from somewhere else, you combine it with your own risk analysis, and come to your own conclusions. Without these new data mining technologies and new tools which are out there, you won't be successfully able to identify security incidents properly and react properly. All this needs to be performed in appropriate kind of physical space with a proper kind of physical access control. No reason to talk more about this. And at the very end, and this also needs to be understood, the attacking environment is very dynamic. We have no idea what new kind of attacks will come out tomorrow or then the week after. Which means that also your security operations center has to have the same kind of dynamics. There must be a kind of continuous improvement management in order to ensure that whatever possible gaps you're realizing, you're working on them before any attacker has the same idea. So this, if you like, so on a high level, are the 10 major points which need to be considered when talking about the SOC environment. Maybe I can skip this one. So in terms of what an organization should do, what you should do in order to move ahead successfully, if you like, so we defined a strategy which consists of the 3 A's, if you like. So, the 3 A's which they stand for activate, adapt, and anticipate. So what does it mean? Activate, with that we mean that what you should do at the very end, at the very beginning, as a kind of basis, is activate your capabilities. You would be surprised to see that what all on security capabilities is already built in your systems that you're currently running. There's lots of logging capabilities that you can use. The networking capabilities, the data monitoring capabilities and so on. Also all the security tools you have. They're very powerful. They provide you with a lot of information. The problem only is that you don't really make use of it properly. So activate your capabilities is, if you like, so the very first start. Adapt, and we had this very nicely explained in the presentation before, adapt leading practice and state-of-the-art technology. There are many guidance out there who give you a kind of idea of what you should do in order to manage your information security properly. So adapt all these standards, adapt all these leading practices, make use of the leading state-of-the-art technology is another factor. And at the very end, anticipate. Anticipate what a potential attacker could do or would do. So just thinking in the way of an attacker could think, this also would help you in order to protect your environment properly. At this point, I would just highlight a couple of numbers that we got recently from a survey that we are doing each year. It's the so-called GISS, Global Information Security Survey, which we're doing amongst something like 2,000 organizations globally in order to understand what is their current situation, what is their current plans in order to improve the overall security function within the organization. I picked out a couple of numbers that are related to the topic of SOC and how to face cybersecurity. So if you look at those numbers, we see that currently only something like 42%, which is, let's say, 2 out of 5 of the respondees, do have a security operations center in place that summarizes or concludes these activities I was just explaining. You see there's still a far way to go, but people are moving into this direction and understand that this is the right way in order to improve the overall security. But it's not only to establish a SOC. The SOC really needs to be in place and needs to be up and running in order to identify possible incidents at the spot and react as fast as possible. And so what currently only 37% of the respondees say that they do have the capability in identifying or having insights on cyber risks instantly in real time. So most of them still do their analysis of incidents in the aftermaths, which means that at the very end, in our modern time of cyber attacks, it's simply too late. To have another number on this, so we were asking on how long does it take between the recognition of an incident and the point of time where you start investigating the incident. And it's only 12% who say we do this within the next 10 minutes, which would be an appropriate kind of time scale in order to really contain an attacker's damage that he could do on your system. The majority, you see, reacts within 1 hour, 4 hours, or even 1 day, which is, if you can imagine, far too long in order to avoid major damage. So within 1 day, a potential attacker could really do big harm. He could have a disastrous impact on the services. He could download lots of information, which is very critical to your business. So definitely that's too long. And what is even more critical, that 1/3 of the respondees didn't even know how long they usually take in order to investigate incidents. So the clear message here is use your capabilities, use your forces in order to, first of all, of course, identify incidents and start investigation as soon as possible. How can this be done? By adapting latest technology, as already pointed out. Adapting latest technology for us means it's not only, but for sure, establishing and implementing tools is the necessary basis in order to be able to detect and react on incidents properly. But all these should be integrated in what we call a detection program. So overall policies and procedures and a kind of workflow in the way which describes the way how you, after you have identified an incident, after you have investigated the incident, how you detect whether this really is a cyber attack, how you identify what is the target of the attack, what is the source of the attack, what means did he use, and at the very end came to the way you're designing your response to this attack. So how you at the very end be able to reach this level of security you would like to reach. What you can see here is if you look at the very bottom of this table here, only 9% have what we call a mature and controlled and managed detection program, which considers, first of all, of course, which includes, first of all, the deployment of the necessary tools, which also considers the latest information about vulnerabilities and threats which in your organization within the technology they are using, and at the very end also has appropriate management process to identify, investigate, and detect attacks and incidents. So which is really very few. And if you go, the further you go up, you see the less the mature is the detection program that have been identified in these various organizations. And by the way, 16% said they don't have such a program at all, which means that whenever anything happens, you know, they just start getting busy and trying to do whatever they can do, but there is no kind of plan in order to cope with this problem in a kind of managed way. Another aspect which I would like to point out here is that it's no longer sufficient to only look at the IT which you're hosting, which you're running within your organization. So securing the servers, the data within your data center for sure is key. And you need to do everything possible in order to secure this information properly. But what we would like to point out is that this is no longer enough. You have to look further. You have to look beyond your borders. And this is getting more and more complicated the more or the far you have to look. For sure, your service providers are also a critical element of your overall security. The service providers at the very end, and even if you operate most of your IT internally, you always have service providers, for example, for your communication, for your network, if it comes to the development of software and so on. So there's always third parties you have to cope with. And it's more and more critical that in your relationship with your service providers, you identify what security tasks need to be performed by the service providers and how you can control that they perform these tasks properly. So service providers is another element. You maybe are using employee agencies for consultants or contractors for a certain period of time, and even here take care of that the proper controls are put in place, that within your contracts with these agencies you ensure that personnel is properly identified, it's properly trained, the necessary non-disclosure agreements and security agreements are put in place. So all this are examples for controls which you have to put on organizations which are outside your borders, if you like so. Social media, let me pick up this one. Specifically as a government organization, the overall, let's say, political situation in the country, or let's say the latest decisions of your parliament, of your political leaders, might have impact on cyber attacks or what's going on in the cyberspace. You can get indicators on, you know, whether there's some kind of rumors going on, some kind of disagreement or whatsoever. You can get those indicators from social media. So it definitely makes sense to have some kind of sensors within some social media groups. And there are, for example, Twitter groups out there who call themselves anonymous hackers and so on. By watching what's going on within these groups, you might be able to prepare for upcoming attacks properly. On the other hand side, also your employees are active in this kind of social media. And it's very critical to understand what amount of information they're sharing in the social media. So what you have to do is you have to give them proper guidance. You have to have installed the proper kind of policies to make clear what topics as an employee of a governmental agency you can share in the social media, and which are definitely topics you should not share in these kind of environments. To give you an example on this, we did an analysis for a company. This was a production company of some certain tools. And what we recognized when we went through Facebook is that there was even a complete kind of procurement process which we could just follow through Facebook. So the very first contact between a customer and this very company regarding a possible purchase, the pricing communication, the communication about the delivery of the tool, all this could be found in Facebook and everybody could read it. So you can imagine that this is definitely the wrong way in order to do your business. Okay, so all these are what we call variable factors. So areas where you, even if it's not under your full control, but you can put some controls in place in order to monitor and supervise these areas properly. And the very end, at the far end, there are uncontrollable factors, which is, let's say, worldwide events, the overall economy and things like that. For sure, we all understand we can change them, but still it makes sense to monitor, to analyze, and make your own conclusions in time before any attacker does so. Okay, so this was a long explanation. We come to the following numbers. So as part of this question, so we were asking also a number of organizations on to what extent do you do kind of supervision of your service providers? And if you can see, what you can see is here is, yes, most of the companies do so. There are still something like 13% who don't do any kind of assessments of their service providers at all, which for sure is a big risk. There are some of them who still work with kind of self-assessments, which according to our understanding is the kind of weakest assessment you can do. So you just ask your service provider, so please give me your assessment on the strength of your security controls, and he does his own assessment and gives back his response. For sure this is a little bit, but can you really rely on it? That's a good question. So that is why something like 27% ask independent parties in order to perform assessments of their service providers to get an independent view on whether the security controls are properly established. So coming to the last point, anticipate coming attacks. I would just in a nutshell give you five key questions which can help you to identify are we in a situation to anticipate what could happen. And the first question, and this is at the very bottom, is as simple as that. So do you know what you have that others may want? Do you know what could make these assets more vulnerable? So which means what is the technical environment, what is the operational environment, what are the vulnerabilities that somebody external could use in order to get access to these things. As long as you don't have an idea of your vulnerability, you know, always there's a big risk that attackers are successful. Next point is, do you understand how these assets could be accessed or disrupted? So what is, say, the normal kind of access you do have on these assets? What are the people that do have access to these assets, that do, as part of their normal activities, perform any changes or read or whatsoever, have access to these things? Since what you can imagine is that also attackers will focus on the very same people. You know, these kind of targeted attacks where somebody with specific skills, with specific capabilities in an organization gets an email from somebody external with some fancy kind of attachment, and which whatever relates to his you know, interests or business, and ask him, so please, you know, why don't you read this, why don't you open this, why don't you go to this and that web page in order to get more knowledge whatsoever. So these would be targeted attacks, and for sure they are targeted to those people who have the access rights, who have the capabilities to access your key assets. Question 3. Question 4, would you know if you were being attacked and if these assets are compromised? So would you recognize an attack? Another critical point. As long as you don't recognize, attackers might steal whatever they want to steal without, you know, you even being able to react on this. And finally, do you have a plan to react to an attack and minimize the harm caused? So why do we ask for this? Since you should not only start thinking about how you could reduce harm when something happened, you should have your plans in place now. So as soon as you have identified your assets, you understood the vulnerabilities around with them, you understood, let's say, the business context, you have to already think about what needs to be done in case that these assets are attacked. How can I minimize any impact that the attacker possibly does? So all this looks pretty complex, And what is also our recommendation in order to improve your security in this, it's clearly collaboration. At the very beginning already said that experience and skills for security teams are getting more and more complicated. You do not only have to know your tools well, your firewall, your antivirus, intrusion protection, all these kind of things. You also need to be aware of what is happening out there, what vulnerabilities are there, what are the latest attacks. You need to understand your business, you need to do a thorough risk analysis. So the kind of skills which are required within your security team are getting more and more complex. Will you be able to have all these skills within your organization? Depends on the size of your organization. If you're a big organization, maybe you have the capabilities, but if you're a smaller one, clearly you don't. But even if you're a big organization, in order to understand the cyber risk space properly, it always makes sense to collaborate with your peers. So specifically in Gulf, it really makes sense as, for example, a national agency to communicate to some extent with your peers in the other Gulf countries in order to understand what is the risk that they identified, what are the latest attacks that happened over there, what are the latest initiatives that they are driving, and can you maybe leverage some of their experiences. So collaboration is key in order to be successfully in this, if you like, so cyber war. And for clearly you have to understand what is the amount of information I can share with external partners, to what extent I can collaborate, what are the things I have to keep secret, I have to do on my own. Okay, so these are the 3 A's as a short summary. So activate your capabilities, adapt leading practice and state-of-the-art technology, and anticipate the worst. So think in the mind of the attacker and be prepared. If you're interested in further information, the EY Global Information Security Survey is publicly available. You can download it under this web page. And for sure, I'm also available for further discussions if you like so. So thank you very much for your attention. And yeah, I wish you a good conference the rest of the day.